good morning, Year 10. I hope you're all right. Hope you had a nice weekend. Looking forward to the bank holiday, which is coming up later this week. So today we are going to be looking at the big kind of issue, really, that is at the crux of a lot of what is going on in Elizabeth's reign that we've sort of touched on already, but today is going to become a bit more of a focus. So we've been looking at all those challenges that Elizabeth inherits when she takes over, with her legitimacy, the foreign policy situation, her finances, obviously none of which are necessarily ideal. And then on top of all of that, she has got this absolutely all-encompassing issue of religion. So the next couple of lessons we're going to be having a look at how Elizabeth deals with that, because it is one of the first things she chooses to address, and sort of see how successful she is in responding to that challenge. But before we look at that, obviously today, the first thing we need to do is actually have a look at what the religious situation is. Okay, so to remind ourselves what those divisions are and why they are so serious. Okay. So we've got a couple of key words that we need to know before we can understand some of this stuff. The first key word, now you may remember this from year 7 when you did the break with Rome and Henry. It was a long time ago though, so no worries if you don't. So it's quite a long, funny word, and the word is transubstantiation. Okay, and this word is a concept which is connected to these images you're seeing here. Now, you may not be a churchgoer, but presumably a lot of you will have heard of something called communion. Okay, so you can see that's what's going on in these images here is when the congregation, the people at the church, are given the opportunity to have some bread and some wine, supposedly because that is somewhat connected to what Jesus did at the Last Supper before he was crucified. And he said, take this, do this in remembrance of me. The bread is my body, the wine is my blood. A bit of a paraphrase there, but that's essentially what it is. Now, this is an important concept because Protestants and Catholics, so those big two ideologies, they fundamentally disagree on how this communion, what it represents, why it's significant, and how it works, okay? And transubstantiation is at the heart of that. And basically what it is, that Catholics, so if you're a Catholic, if you're a traditional Catholic, i.e. you follow the Pope, you are what most people would have been for the medieval period, and obviously for most the Tudor period as well, until Henry broke from Rome. A Catholic believes that when you have that bread and that wine, you are literally drinking the blood of Jesus and eating the body of Jesus. Alright, so it's a bit strange. It's not a metaphor, it's not just symbolic, it is a literal transformation. Okay? I think trans often helps you there. And this idea that when the priest says his kind of special words before raising the host, that's what it's called here. It's called the host because supposedly it's like the host of Jesus. You might say like you have a host body when you have sort of parasites and bacteria and things. In this case, the bread is hosting Jesus temporarily. Okay, holds it aloft to show that significance. Okay, and that is transubstantiation. And the reason that Catholic churches, so you don't see them very often anymore because of the break from Rome, but this big wooden thing, it's called a rood screen. And in a Catholic church, this big screen, this rood screen, separates the altar from the people, from the congregation. And that's because they believe that this magical transformation happens at the moment of communion. All right, Jesus literally enters the building, as it were. All right, he literally comes in that wine and that bread. Protestants, in contrast, they don't believe that Jesus is literally there. They believe it's just a symbol. Okay, we're just doing it to remember Jesus. It's not that he's literally in the room. Catholics, as I say, they really think Jesus literally, genuinely comes into that bread and that wine. Okay, and that's a really important difference between the two faiths, and it explains a lot of the other differences we see more visually. Okay, and obviously that comes down to the rood screen separating the clergy from the congregation. You don't get those in Protestant churches. The fact that Catholic robes tend to be a lot more fancy, the fact that priests can't marry in Catholicism, that all comes down fundamentally in large part to this idea that they somehow have this magical power to transform the bread and the wine. Okay, but say Protestants don't believe that. The other key word today is relic. Now, you're probably more likely to have heard of this one. What a relic is, basically, it's a holy object that in some way is connected to something sacred, so a person or whatever. So, for instance, it might be the bones of a saint, the saint's finger bone, or a piece of the true cross, which is the cross that Jesus was crucified on, or something like that. Those would all be relics. So, what you've got here, this relic here on the left, supposedly this is part of the manger that Jesus was laying in when he was a baby in the Christmas story. You can see here this individual reaching out to touch it as it's carried past. Okay, this box here supposedly contains the robes of Thomas Becket, who you may remember again from year 7, who was martyred in 1170. He was murdered in Canterbury Cathedral. He became a saint, so his robes are therefore seen as very, very sacred. Now, relics are quite an important part of the Catholic religion again, okay, and they are seen as kind of a way for people to connect to God. You can touch it to gain luck. You can pray at a relic. It's why people would go on pilgrimages, because they would travel a long way to go and see a particular relic they might want to, that they might feel would be important to them, and so on. So that's what a relic is. Again, Protestants don't like relics. They don't see it as a genuine thing. They see it as idolatry. Right? It's like an idol. It's not like God really. It's just a kind of distraction, and therefore they are very anti relics. But as I say, the Catholic Church are quite keen on them. So those are our two key words: transubstantiation, this magical transformation of the bread and the wine that Catholics believe in, and relics. Again, these holy objects that again Catholics believe in, but Protestants don't. So, before we can sort of consider how this all affects England, we need to make sure that we are all 100% clear on what the differences are between a Catholic and a Protestant. Okay, because all of these changes and arguments that are happening in English churches aren't going to make a lot of sense if we don't actually know why they're arguing about it. So, what are the differences that they want or object to? What is the situation? So, what I'm going to ask you to do is, you've got two images here. I've already told you a couple of differences with those keywords. I want you to just pause the video and spend a couple of minutes having a really good look at these two pictures. So this one on the left is a Catholic church. This one on the right is a Protestant church. What I want you to do is look really closely at those images and try and come up with as many differences as you can. Okay, so it's kind of like a mega spot the difference activity. All right, but with a little bit more, intellectual rigor. Okay, so what is the difference between a Catholic church and a Protestant church? A lot of them are very, very visual, so you should be able to pick up on them hopefully quite easy. Okay, so pause the video, couple of minutes. You don't have to write anything down necessarily unless you want to, but start the video back up again when you're ready, and I'll go through and point out some of the things hopefully you should have spotted. Okay, so let's start with the most obvious difference, which is this church is much, much more richly decorated than the Protestant church. All right, you can see in this Catholic church, they've got images everywhere, they've got statues, they've got lots of colour, lots of gold. Look at that altar. It's just generally much, much more decorated. Compare it to this place, which is very plain. This is probably much more the sort of church you would recognise, because obviously we are Church of England, so we are officially Protestants in our country. So when we go to St Michael's for the church service, this is the kind of layout we're used to. But a Catholic church is much, much more richly decorated. So that's difference number one. That extends to the priests. So if you look at those two priests, the Catholic priest is much, much more richly decorated. Again, look at his outfit, much, much more sort of fancy and decorated than the outfit being worn by the Protestant priest. There's that difference that I pointed out to you a minute ago. There's this rood screen, okay, ROOD, a rood screen, a big wooden screen that is kind of separating the altar and the priest from the rest of the congregation. Okay, that's another difference. What else can we spot? Ooh, well, here we go. These, you notice anything on these? What language are they written in? Our Father, the Lord is my shepherd. That's English, right? We can read that, that's English. That's a big difference, all right? There's a reason Catholic churches have to have lots of images, and it is partly to glorify God, because they think that decoration will do that, but it's also because the congregation otherwise probably won't have much of an idea what's going on. And that's because Catholic services, the Catholic Bible, is written in Latin. Okay, across the board. Okay, all if you go to a Catholic service in Rome, Catholic service in England, both of those will be in the same language. They will both be in Latin. Okay, that's the language of the Catholic Church. In contrast, Protestants like things to be in English or whatever the language is where you're based. So it's called the vernacular, the common language of a country. So, for instance, in France, the vernacular is French. In England, the vernacular is English. Okay, and Protestants believe that whatever the vernacular is of your local area, that is what texts that and services should be in. All right, because they want everyone to understand everything that's going on. Okay, so there's some pretty important differences. Just generally say very visually, there is that the Protestant churches are much more simple. Okay, there's also this very key difference of language. Okay, the vernacular in Protestantism, Latin in Catholicism, and also this kind of separation of the priest from the people, or in this case, the fact the priest is not set apart in that same way. Okay, and that is fundamentally down to that idea of transubstantiation. The Catholic priest kind of has this sort of mystical connection with God, this mystical power. He transforms the wine and the bread into the body and blood, okay, of Jesus Christ. Over here, it's just a symbol, so therefore the priest is not, carrying out a magical act in the same way. So he's not set apart or seen as special and powerful as a Catholic priest is. Okay. So let's look at some sort of photos again, just to highlight this. So basically, Catholic Church, again, this is a real one, very, very richly decorated. You can see another rood screen here, a little bit more fancy, separating the altar and so on from the people. Okay, so just to run down, what do Catholics believe? Well, number one, they're led by the Pope. Okay, the Pope is seen as the representative of God on earth. Okay, and therefore head of the church, and therefore the authority on all things spiritual. Okay, so whatever the Pope says goes, because he's getting his instructions from God, as far as Catholics are concerned. That idea of transubstantiation, that magical transformation of the bread and the wine, we talked about that. The Latin, so the services, Mass is in Latin, the Scripture, the Bible is in Latin, prayer books are in Latin. Okay. Decoration, much more richly decorated. Okay, partly to help ordinary people understand the Bible stories and what's happening, but also to glorify God. Got 7 sacraments. So the sacraments are the kind of holy things that people go through. So one of them is baptism, for instance, marriage, becoming a priest, and so on. You don't need to know all of those, but the Catholics believe there are 7 of them. Relics, Catholics like relics. Okay, they like to pray to relics, they like to collect relics, they like to have them on display. And this is kind of why relics exist, because in Catholicism, ordinary people can't communicate with God directly. Okay, because God's a busy man. Ordinary people should not be communicating with God directly. That's why you have priests. Okay, so an ordinary person, if they want to communicate with God, they'll have to speak to the priest and get them to do it for them, or get the church to kind of act as what we would call an intermediary, okay, a middleman to communicate with God for people. Okay, and if you can't do that, you should be praying to saints, because then they'll speak to God for you. Okay, so an ordinary person should not be directly communicating with God. Right, that is reserved for priests and saints. Okay, and because of that, again, priests are set apart, which means they can't get married. So Catholic priests aren't allowed to get married. That's why they wear special robes, and so on. Okay, so that's the Catholic Church. Now, the Catholic Church was the dominant institution in Europe and indeed quite a large proportion of the world for centuries. Okay, I mean millennia almost, nearly sort of 1,000 years of dominance. Okay, however, in 1517, this guy enters the game. Okay, this is a man called Martin Luther. I'm sure a lot of you will have heard of Martin Luther. He was a monk from a place called Wittenberg, which is in Germany, what we would now think of as Germany, just there. And he, in 1517, so quite close to when Elizabeth becomes queen, relatively speaking, he decides that the Catholic Church is no good. He decides that they are sort of corrupt and that they are not actually, teaching as God wants. Okay, and that a lot of the things they believe in are unnecessary and wrong, and that there needs to be change. And in fact, what Martin Luther does in 1517 is he goes to the church in his town of Wittenberg. He writes down all of his complaints that he has with the Catholic Church, and there are 95 of them, 95 theses, okay, that he calls it, and nails them to the door. Okay, quite a brave thing to do, given what happens to people that criticise the church, which we'll come to in a moment. But luckily for him, it takes off, and it begins to spread across a lot of Europe. Now, you can see from this map here that it doesn't take over all of Europe initially. Okay, all the places that are green in this map are still Catholic. Okay, so they pretty much, it still remains very much the dominant religion. Okay, but yellow, these yellow places, that's where Martin Luther's ideas, Lutheranism, that's where they start to spread. The blue ideas are something called Calvinism, which is a kind of offshoot of Luther, so another form of Protestants. And then the red one is Church of England, which is a kind of strange version of Protestantism that Henry VIII came up with, which we can come back to in a minute. So, what are the differences then? So there's a Protestant church, visually very different. Okay, you don't have a pope in Protestantism. There's no, there's no belief that there is an earthly figure who is in charge of the church. As far as Protestants are concerned, the only person in charge of the church is Jesus Christ and God. Okay, that, as far as they're concerned, that's that. There is no one person who can sit in a special hat on earth and start issuing, things saying it's what God wants. No one has the power to do that as far as Protestants are concerned. They don't believe in transubstantiation. Okay, they think it's just symbolic. Okay, they do have communion. Okay, you can see there's the communion table there. They do have the blood, they do have the bread and the wine, but what they don't believe is that it literally transforms. Okay, they see it as just a symbolic act to remember Jesus, not a actual entering the room kind of situation. Their services and their scripture is in the vernacular, so in the common tongue of wherever it is that they're based, so in our case, English. They don't decorate the churches. Some of them still have stained glass windows. There is some elements of decoration in Church of England churches, but it's much, much more minimal compared to Catholic churches. Okay, because what the Protestants believe is that is a distraction. Having all these decorations and beautiful statues and gold and so on, it's unnecessary. You're there to pray to God. You don't need all that. No relics for a similar reason. Okay, they think they're just unnecessary. They're just a way of getting money out of people to come and visit them. They don't see it as actually an important part of religion. They only have 2 sacraments. Remember, the Catholics had 7. They only have 2, one of which is communion. Okay, so they still believe in that, but they just don't think it's a magical process. Anyone can communicate with God. Okay, so the Protestants, they're very clear, and Martin Luther's very clear, that to be a good Christian, all you need to do is believe. You need to believe in God, and that's enough. Okay, and anybody can communicate with God. Anyone can read the Bible. That's why it's in English. Anyone can be a part of that. Okay, in the Catholic Church, obviously the Catholic hierarchy, the priests, the bishops, the Pope, they have the power because they are the ones that can read things in Latin. Most people can't do that. They are the ones that manage that magical transformation, and they are the ones that can communicate with God. In a Protestant religion, anyone can. Anyone can read the Bible, anyone can pray to God directly. And because of that, priests aren't as special. So they can marry, they wear sort of special robes, but not in the same way as Catholics. It's very much more minimal, and it's much less kind of different and special to how Catholic priests are viewed. Okay, they have a much more sort of relaxed outlook. Okay, they're just there to help people. They're not there to communicate with God on people's behalf. Right, they can help people, they can support people, and a good priest is important, but they're not sort of magical, all-powerful figures as they are in the Catholic Church. So, now you might be thinking, after all that, this very simple question: why does anyone even care? All right, all these details. Perhaps if you're not a Christian, they might come across as kind of petty. So, oh God, who cares whether it's literally transforming or not? Who cares if we have relics or stained glass windows? What's the let people just get on with it. Why does it matter? I'll tell you why it matters. All right. It matters to people at the time an enormous amount. They were willing to burn alive to get this right. Okay, hundreds of people willingly burnt alive, tied to a post, tied to a stake, and burnt alive. All right, which, as you can imagine, is not a particularly nice way to go. All right, because of their faith. All right, because they felt it is that important that churches are decorated or not. Okay, they really, really saw this as the most important thing in the world. Okay, if you think, we looked at the Cold War, we've looked at the conflicting ideologies in that. There was that real hatred of communism and capitalism, rivals. This is similar, but it's almost more extreme. Okay, if you are a Protestant, you think Catholics, they're doing it wrong. They're worshipping God wrong. And if you worship God wrong, what happens? You burn in hell forever. Okay, these are some images of hell from the sort of around, it was within a sort of century or so of when Elizabeth is queen. So they're relatively sort of close to her period, and they demonstrate just what people believed would happen after they die. All right, this is a society where everybody is a Christian. All right, there are no atheists. That doesn't exist. That's not even a concept that anyone's come up with yet. All right, everybody believes. Okay, and they believe, therefore, that when you die, you basically got a couple of options. You're either going to go up to heaven and have a nice time and be happy. You might have to go sit in a place called purgatory for a while, while you cleansed away your sins before you can get into heaven. Or if you're really bad, you're going to go to hell. And as you can see, hell is not a lot of fun. It's full of demons, it's full of tortures, and as far as you're concerned, you're going to be there for all eternity. So nobody really wants to be tortured and treated horribly by big scary demons for the rest of the time, for all eternity. No one wants to be tortured. As you can see, it looks pretty unpleasant. All right, so as far as a lot of people were concerned at the time, being burnt alive was preferable to believing the wrong thing and ending up in hell. All right, which is kind of hard for us to understand, but I think it's really important just to stress that. All right, because so much of the problems Elizabeth faces, so much of the conflict in her period comes down to this disagreement over what is the correct way to worship God. And people really, really took it incredibly seriously. Okay, it really was a matter of their immortal soul. Okay, so yeah, it may seem a little trivial to us, but for them, absolutely not. Most important thing in the world. On top of that, of course, not only is there this kind of constant battle, where's my soul going to go? Am I going to go and suffer in hell forever, or am I going to go to heaven? There's also the fact that the church was actually a really important part of most people's lives. Okay, because everyone is a Christian, everyone goes to church every week. Okay, there's also everyone pays taxes to the church called tithes, a tenth of your annual income. Okay, it's the centre of life. It's a social hub in many ways. You go there every week, you hear your service, you meet people. All of the holidays, the days off, why are they called holidays? Holy days. Okay, so St. George's Day, St. Weather's Day, a lot more than we have now. Those are the days that people got off, the church festivals. Okay, church courts were really important for many issues. Okay, so they dealt with the wills and inheritance. They dealt with marriages. Okay, and whether or not marriages were legal or not, annulling marriages if necessary, which is the kind of Catholic equivalent of divorce. Monasteries provided education, they provided healthcare, they provided charity. Okay, all of those things that we get from so many other places came down to the church. Of course, so not only are they just a really big part of your kind of day-to-day existence, there is also this constant kind of feeling that the only way to avoid this horrible fate of burning in hell is to go to church and do the right thing and make your way to heaven. So the first question I would like you to answer for me today is this: why was the church so important? Okay, why do they care so much about these petty little differences? Well, it's what we see them as petty. Okay, so consider everything we've just talked about. Consider the role church played in people's lives on a day-to-day basis and in this kind of eternal sense. Okay, at this time, people genuinely felt that there was kind of this invisible battle going on, okay, for their souls. There's this feeling that the devil is active, he's in the world, he's trying to tempt people to get it wrong and go to hell so he can torture them. So there's a real feeling you need to be on the right side of this. You need to be believing in the right things. Okay, so write your answer to that question, and then we can move on to the next bit. What I want you to consider is, because basically Elizabeth's got to make a choice, right? She becomes queen 1558. One of the first things she needs to do is decide which way she's going. Is she going to continue with what her sister's been doing? Is she going to keep steaming on down that Catholic path? Or is she going to go the way of her father, to an extent, and her brother, and go Protestant? Okay, because, and there's another key point we haven't mentioned here, the head of the Protestant church can be the monarch. It doesn't have to be the Pope. So, what I need to consider is, what do you think are the most important differences between Catholicism and Protestantism? Firstly, for ordinary people. So, if you're an ordinary person living in this period, what is going to be the main difference between the two for you? And you think you're going to church every week, so what are you going to notice? What's going to really be different for you? And secondly, what is going to be the most important difference for the monarch? Okay, so in terms of ordinary people, let's think about this. Well, they're going every Sunday. The whole look of their church is going to be transformed. All right, all of that decoration that they're used to, the rood screen, the robes, all of that's going to be gone. Suddenly, they're in a plain church. The Pope is no longer in charge. Everything is suddenly in a language they understand, which has not been the case for hundreds of years. And they're allowed to directly communicate with God. They're allowed to read the Bible. They're allowed to access these things themselves, and they've never been able to before. So that's going to be probably quite a big deal to the average Elizabethan. What about the monarch? What's most important for her? Is it what it looks like? Or is it who's in charge? So have a think, write that answer down, and then start the video back up, and we'll move on to the next bit. So, church absolutely central to people's lives, and since 1517 and the Reformation, the reforming of the church, there had been this big split. Okay, do we believe in Protestants or do we believe in Catholics? Who is correct? Who should we follow? And then by the reign of Elizabeth, we get an additional option. Player 3 has entered the game, which is these guys, the Puritans. Okay, so we've got Protestants, we've got Catholics. Puritans are basically hardcore Protestants. They are the most extreme Protestants you can ever be. The reason they're called Puritans is because they want to purify the church. Okay, they want to purify the church. They want to get rid of anything that is not directly mentioned in the Bible. Right? They think that everything else, so things like relics, purgatory, stained glass windows, none of that's in the Bible, so we don't need it. Get rid of it. All we need is what is in the Bible. We're going to be pure. Okay, so they are essentially the same beliefs as Protestants, but just even more extreme. Okay, so no decoration at all. You can see that from that image there. No special robes for the priests. Right, priests are basically just not special at all, as far as they're concerned. Right, you don't even need a bishop, you don't need a pope, you don't need any sort of church hierarchy. There's no need for any of that. All right, it's just the congregation and their Bible study. That's all that matters in a Puritan church. Okay, I don't know if you can see, but this is, you can see the pews, so the places where people sit in this Puritan church. They're very, very close together. That is done on purpose, so there is no room to kneel, because kneeling is what Catholics do. So we don't kneel, and the church is literally designed so you can't kneel even if you wanted to, right? Because that's not what they believe. Now, the reason the Puritans emerge in England at this time is, we've already talked that Mary, Elizabeth's sister, when she was queen, she tries to bring back Catholicism to England after Henry broke from Rome. Okay, and she really goes for it. All right, 300 Protestants burnt alive. Okay, just for being Protestants. Now, 300 sounds like a lot, but obviously it's actually not that high a number out of the whole population. And plenty of other Protestants ran. They went to the Netherlands, to this kind of area, Germany, those kind of places, because they were Protestant, they were tolerant, they would be burnt alive if they went there. Now, those people are called the Marian exiles, okay, because they are exiles from Mary. All right, they left the country to get away from her. Now, when Elizabeth came to the throne, and the crazy Catholic, as far as they were concerned, was gone, they came back. And they came back radicalised. All right, they have been in the Netherlands, in Germany, in the hotbed of Protestantism, all those new ideas kind of taking hold, and they come back to England, the most extreme Protestants they could ever be. They come back as Puritans. Okay, now some Puritans, such as the Calvinists, remember the blue areas are Calvinist, that type of Protestant, they think if you think your monarch's not doing things right in terms of religion, you can give them the boot, you can get rid of them. So Elizabeth's got a whole new challenge on her hands. Okay. Not only does she have Catholics and Protestants and that kind of confusion to deal with, she also now has extreme Protestants that are going to be even more firmly pushing for change, and they believe they can get rid of her if she doesn't do it quickly enough. So, some real challenge there. All right, she's come to the throne in the middle of an absolute hotbed of religious turmoil and division. So, now we've been through all three of those major different kind of branches of Christianity, and that's really important to stress. They are all still Christians. Okay, it's not Protestants versus Christians or Catholics versus Christians, which sometimes I hear people saying. They're all Christians, they're all Christians, they're all Christianity, they all believe in God, they all believe in Jesus, they all believe in what happened in the Bible. That's not up for debate, really. There's sort of minor differences there, but basically they all believe in God. That's not up for debate. What the differences are these kind of nitty-gritty details, okay, in terms of how things should look, what language things should be in, and so on. So what I'd like you to do, just to help you kind of recap all of what we've just discussed, help you be really clear on how it all works, is I want you to sort the different beliefs. So you've got a sheet, a Word document that just has loads and loads of different beliefs listed. I want you to sort those into Protestant, Catholic, Puritan, or all of them. Okay, because some of the beliefs, there's for instance one like, I don't know, Jesus died on the cross, they all believe in that. That's an all belief. But some only Protestants think, some only Puritans think, some only Catholics think. Okay, obviously there's a lot of crossover between Puritan and Protestant, but there's some more extreme beliefs that are exclusive to the Puritans. So I want you to go through 3 colours, or you can just, I don't know, do CP Puritan or something like that. I don't know, whatever's easiest for you. Sort them into those 3 categories, just to check you understand all of those differences. Okay, now as I said, there's obviously advantages to a monarch by picking, changing this religion. Okay, Protestantism, for instance, for Henry VIII, the reason he wanted that is he doesn't actually believe in any of it. He loved Catholicism. Okay, 1521, Henry wrote an entire pamphlet about how awful Martin Luther was. Okay, it's not that he believes in Protestantism, he just wants to get rid of the Pope. Alright, so that's what Henry's in it for. But later on, it gets a little bit more complicated, and Edward and Mary go a little bit further with it. So, what we're going to do is to say that this is often referred to as the religious roller coaster. Okay, because things change so abruptly. Okay, obviously this is not over a particularly long space of time. So Henry dies in 47, Mary dies in 58. So it really is only a sort of 10-year period, really, when all this incredibly dramatic religious change is going back and forth. So for the average Elizabethan, or the average Tudor person living through it, it would seem very abrupt. It is described as being a bit like a roller coaster. Okay. So I've got a little clip for you to watch first of all, just to summarise all of that that change, and we'll just stick that on now.
This is the story of how one German monk and one rampant king kicked up a fuss, changing England's religion forever. In 1517, a German monk called Martin Luther protested against the Catholic Church. He thought it was corrupt and hated its practices, such as letting people pay for forgiveness. The story goes that Luther sparked the beginning of the Protestant faith by nailing his ideas to a church door, which is braver than it sounds. Luther then formed the Lutheran Church, and his ideas spread around Europe. Meanwhile, in Catholic England, things were changing too. King Henry VIII was desperate to have a son to inherit the crown. He asked the Pope if he could divorce his wife and marry again. The Pope said no. Now, stubborn Henry wasn't going to be bossed about by some Pope, so he divorced his wife, split with Rome, and made himself head of the English Church. Henry did get an heir, and his son Edward was raised a Protestant. When he became king, Edward VI's government passed laws making England a Protestant country. But he died when he was just 16 and Queen Mary succeeded him. She tried to restore Catholicism and burnt Protestants who disagreed. Mary was followed by the Protestant Elizabeth I, who first tried to go easy on Catholics, but then some plotted against her and wanted her dead, so she changed her mind and persecuted them.
Okay, so hopefully you kind of got the general gist of it from that, but we start off with Henry. He's sort of Protestant, but not really. He's still basically a Catholic, okay, so he's basically up here, but just without the Pope. We then go to Edward, and we go full Protestant. We go kind of really extreme Protestant here. We then go to Mary, who goes full Catholic, even more than her dad. She tries to get back with the Pope, basically. And then obviously Elizabeth comes next, and she has to pick what she's going to do. Okay, so what I want you to do now is you've got some scanned in pages from a textbook and some tasks just to help you kind of summarise those changes. I would like you to complete those in your book. When you've done that, you have one final question to think about, which is Mary. She faces very little opposition when she tries to bring Catholicism back. So you can see on this roller coaster, Edward tries to go full Catholic. He goes around sort of destroying things, getting rid of the decorations, really goes quite extreme with it. Mary then comes in, and actually most people in England are kind of happy. They're kind of cool with it. Like they're happy to go back to Catholicism. Why? And to answer that question, think back to what we've said about kind of the impact of those visual changes. Okay, if you've been doing something one way for generations, for centuries, and suddenly you're told you've got to do it another way or you're going to burn in hell, and there's going to be all this disruption and change, people necessarily, that's going to be quite difficult, isn't it? It's going to be quite difficult to deal with. Think how difficult it has been to go from learning in one way, going into school, having lessons, all of that, to suddenly having to learn from home. All right, that's been a really disruptive, horrible thing. And imagine you were concerned that that disruption might result in you burning in hell forever. All right, it's going to be pretty hard to square with, isn't it? So whilst there were people in England that were quite intense Protestants, they were quite keen to have all these changes. There's also most people, the average people in England, probably are not going to be all that keen to have all this massive change. So when Mary comes to the throne and she tries to put things back as they were, a lot of people are going to be happy with that. And that's why she doesn't face a huge amount of opposition. It's not just England that has all that religious turmoil, it's happening in Europe as well. Okay, so France, they basically split into Protestant and Catholic, and they have lots of wars amongst themselves. Obviously, the main Protestants, they're in the Netherlands, they're in what we would call now Holland. So Spain and France both end up going to war with the Netherlands purely because they're Protestants, the Dutch Protestants. We have a 30 Years' War in Germany between Protestant and Catholic states. In Spain, who are very, intensely Catholic, they have something called the Spanish Inquisition, which you might have heard of, where they try and hunt out anyone who might be a Protestant, therefore a heretic, and try and burn them and torture them. So Europe is being torn apart by this. It's not just England. This is a Europe-wide conflict. Which means that when Elizabeth comes to the throne, her kingdom is really, really divided, okay? And that's largely geographic, okay? So, the closer you are to London, so London's about here, and these kind of southern parts, so basically where we are, they tend to be the Protestant areas, and you can probably see why that is. It's because, look where they are. They're closest to the Netherlands, okay? Now remember, the Netherlands are our main trading partner. That's where we're exporting the wool that we make in our country. So lots of traders are going back and forth from these areas to Holland, the Netherlands, and they're trading ideas, they're trading books, they're becoming more Protestant. However, the north and all kind of these regions of England that are further from London, further from the southeast, they are more likely to be Protestant. Catholic, sorry. Okay, they keep their old beliefs, all right, because they're a long way from the king, the queen, the monarch. They're a long way from the centre of that change, and so they're kind of mostly left to it, and they just keep being Catholics predominantly, particularly up in the north, which is going to be a big, big problem for Elizabeth. The north, the people from what we would call Northumberland, okay, so up around York and that kind of place up with the border of Scotland, they tend to still be very, very Catholic. Okay, so there is that real division in the kingdom. Okay, so I want you to make a few notes about that division because it is quite important, that geographical split between who's a Protestant, who's a Catholic in England. And then you've got a question to think about, which is why might Elizabeth have considered adopting Catholicism. So when she becomes queen, 1558, as I say, she's got to make a decision. Which way is she going to go? And Catholicism might seem like kind of an attractive option. Why? Well, most of your kingdom are still Catholic. Right? They haven't really got on board with all this change. It's been a very short period of turbulence and unrest, and maybe it's just easier just to be Catholic, just to keep things as they are. Like, why rock the boat, you know? But there's a pretty good reason why she can't be a Catholic. And that relates back to her parentage. Why did England break from Rome in the first place? So her dad could marry her mum. Right, her whole existence is because of the Reformation. It's because of that bringing of Protestantism to England. Okay, she literally would not exist had England not moved away from Catholicism. So she can't really now turn around and be a Catholic, because then she would be saying she herself is illegitimate. Because remember, Catholics don't recognise her parents' marriage. So if she now says, cool, we're a Catholic country again, becomes a bit of a problem, because then why is she the queen? So yeah, so a really sort of difficult decision for Elizabeth, and she doesn't really have a lot of choice, unfortunately. She's got to take the hard road. She's got to go Protestant. So your final task for today, and I would like you to complete this kind of just in your books, but next week I'm going to hopefully do a Zoom lesson with you, sort of sometime in the afternoon, where we can go over this. But I want you to basically compare everything you have looked at so far. Okay, all of those challenges that Elizabeth has. Now, bear in mind, her reign's not even got going yet. Every lesson we've had so far has been right at the beginning. Nothing's even really happened, and she's already got problems from all areas. She's got problems with legitimacy, problem with foreign states, financial weakness, and now she's got all this religious division as well. Right, so she's got huge amounts of problems and turmoil and tricky decisions to make from basically all angles when she becomes the queen. So I want you to decide, is religion a bigger problem than anything else or not? Which of these things do you think was the most challenging thing that she faced when she became queen? Is it her legitimacy? Is it the situation with foreign policy? Is it her struggling finances? Or is it this deep, deep religious divide? And I want you to write a peel paragraph, and I'll give you some sentence starters on Show My Homework to help you with that, as to which you think was the most important. And make sure that's nice and long and detailed, because what we're going to do on Monday, hopefully, is we're going to have a Zoom lesson. I'll put the time and things on Show My Homework for you, where we will have a discussion about this issue. Okay, which of these challenges we think was the most significant for Elizabeth. Okay, guys, as ever, if you have any problems today, anything you're not quite sure on, you need any help with, please, 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 please do get in touch. You can send me a message on Teams, you can send me an email, whatever's easiest for you. But please do not suffer in silence. If you're struggling with something, let me know, because things are quite tricky. Right? What we're studying at the moment, it is quite challenging. Right? It's all quite unusual, but I'm here if you need me. All right, have a lovely afternoon. You'll be pleased to know tomorrow's lesson, we're going to be watching the next episode of that documentary, the David Starkey one. So a little bit different to what we have been doing the last couple of lessons. Something a little bit more relaxing, hopefully, just in time for the bank holiday. Okay, guys, speak to you soon.